You know, more and more, I mean, Psalm 1 has always been kind of a favorite passage of mine. And I know I do say that about a lot of passages of Scripture. So sometimes the one I'm working on right now is my favorite, you know. But it truly has been one that has meant a lot to me over the years. And this series that we've been in right now has actually just rekindled that love for this psalm. And I think that when I think about something that really kind of summarizes life, what life is about, this is about as good as it gets. And really it clearly points out you're going to probably walk down a pathway of blessing, or you're going to walk down a pathway of destruction. I mean, really you're kind of two paths. I know there's the narrow way and the broad way, but the broad way is just every other place except Jesus. The narrow way isn't narrow because it's strange or weird. It's narrow because there's only one way through it, and that's Jesus. Jesus is the only way on that way of everlasting life, and so he's the only way to heaven, the only way to have an eternal life with us now, and so every other way, all the other ways, the broad way, is just anything that's not Jesus. Doesn't matter what it is. And so this psalm really talks about that just very clearly. You can go this way, or you can go this way. You can get this result, or you can get this result. And this is what your life will look like. This is what your life will look like. Pretty clear, pretty concisely clear. So I hope that even if you don't memorize it, that the concepts of this psalm will live on in your heart, and you refer back to it. You know, you find yourself walking down a wrong path. Go back to Psalm 1 in 6 verses. You can kind of, it's like going to the spiritual chiropractor. You know, you get your back aligned, you get your spirit aligned, your soul adjusted. And the first 3 verses are about really the right way to go, and the last 3 verses are about the results of not going in the right direction. So I want to just encourage you to, even if you don't memorize it, you know, and even if you don't put that in, that you would keep yourself familiar with it, and maybe read it on a regular basis, just to keep your thoughts intact. We want to go to Psalm 1 again this morning. I'm going to ask you, if you would, to stand to your feet one more time. I warned you last week. You're going to stand again for the scripture, if you didn't mind. And so we can go to Psalm 1, and let's read this together one more time. It says, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction." Stay standing if you would, and we're going to move on forward to next verse, next couple of verses, and these verses are found in Exodus chapter 20, and this is where the 10 Commandments are listed. So we're jumping into the 10 Commandments right in the mix. This is the 4th commandment, and so we're going to read down through what was given to Moses on Mount Sinai as he received this revealed word of God, what we know as the 10 Commandments. Ready? Let's read. "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. And then we're going to look at another passage of Scripture, and that's found in Matthew chapter 12. And this is Jesus having a discussion with the Pharisees about the Sabbath, which is very intriguing and very interesting. We're gonna go over some points about both of these passages here in a few minutes. But let's go on to this passage in Romans chapter 12. Here it is, and let's read it together. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath." He answered, "Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priest. Or haven't you read in the law that the priests on Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath and yet are innocent? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." Going on from that place, he went into their synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus, they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" He said to them, "If any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." And Jesus went ahead and healed that man, by the way, on the Sabbath, as the next verse says. We're going to one more verse we're going to read, and this is from Psalm 23 and verse 3. And probably many of you know this by heart, if you especially start at the top and went down through, because this is a well-known psalm. But it says, "He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake." That phrase, "he refreshes my soul," is, you can be seated now, thank you, is sort of at the heart of what we're going to talk about today, about our souls experiencing Sabbath, and what does that mean for us? In Psalm 1, verse 3, it talks about this tree that is planted there, and it talks about it yields its fruit in season. Now, we talked about seasons of the soul, and we talked about the winter, the spring, the summer, and the fall. We talked about that on one of these Sundays. And but I want to come back to this word seasons as it relates to this topic today, and of the Sabbath, because as you think about this tree, and as we talked about, it was planted. It wasn't there by accident. It didn't just happen to be some nut that fell there. It was planted there. And again, it's not. This really isn't about the tree. It's about the person who lives in a certain way. The tree is the example. This is like the illustration. It's a physical illustration of what this life can be like. So this isn't a lesson about trees. It's a lesson about people, and about how people can live lives fruitfully and purposefully. And so this tree it's talked about here is planted, and it goes through the seasons. Sometimes, when I would read this psalm in my younger years, there were a couple of things that would always kind of trip me up a little bit in this verse, and that is that it said the leaf would not wither, and it's like, well, was this an evergreen tree, or what? It had fruit, produced its fruit in its season, that kind of thing. But here's what I want to tell you. Whenever a tree in this fall season that we're coming up on, when they lose their leaves, the leaves are not withering and dying in the sense of the tree withering and dying. It's healthy tree. It loses its leaves because it's going to come back with a new set of leaves. It's going to come back with new foliage, and so it has to do with the seasons. It's what season it is in. Just because a tree doesn't have any leaves in the winter doesn't mean it's an unhealthy tree. Doesn't mean it's a tree that won't have any leaves. It's just in that season. It's a season where we talked about in that time where there's internal growth going on. There's internal things, nurturing and nutrition that's going on. And so sometimes we don't always visibly see the growth that's occurring. But in fact, most of the time, we don't visibly see it. Even whenever, like this, we had one of our teenagers who had been gone a lot in the summer, came back last week. And, man, he's like this tall. I mean, and I can remember when he was kind of a chubby little guy, like here, Jack is his name. And so some of you know Jack and some of you may not. But, and it's like, I'm looking at him going, you do not get any taller because I refuse to look up to you. I mean, this is just not going to happen. I'm not going to do this, But there's, several of the guys that are, Howard's one of those. And it's like different ones. There's these guys that's just like shot up all of a sudden. They're just boom. And did you see them grow? No. But we noticed they grew. Like all of a sudden you're going like, my goodness, how many inches did you grow over this last few months? And so we see the results of the growth. We don't see the growth. And so growth is going on in things that are healthy continually. It's just that sometimes in some of the seasons it's not visible to the eye. And so this tree, as it experiences the different seasons, experiences fruitfulness, experiences leaves that are come back and flourish, and all that it does prospers. And I mentioned to you, lives up to its full potential is what that means. And so here, the seasons thing is not about it always being the same, but it's about it utilizing all the seasons for the purpose of the seasons. And so whenever you as an individual say, how can I live a healthy life? How can my soul be healthy? I believe one of the key ingredients to the seasons of the soul is a Sabbath. It is a time when we actually obey what God says to do, and we take a Sabbath. And you might ask, well, some people talk about Sabbath in this really rigid kind of way. Other people almost act like it doesn't matter what you do on the Sabbath. And so what are we supposed to understand? What are we supposed to know? What's the Old Testament kind of laid it out there, and then it seems like Jesus, he kind of comes over here and says, hey, the Sabbath was made for man. It's not, get off the back of these guys that are eating grain out here and doing it. And he's sort of like, is he saying the Sabbath doesn't matter? And he goes ahead and heals the guy in the Sabbath, and they're saying that's against the law to do? Is he just a rebel? And he's just going, man, that Old Testament stuff's baloney. The Ten Commandments don't matter anymore. Is that what he's saying? Well, hang with me, and I'm going to talk about that, okay? But let's just start with the Exodus passage where it talks about where actually the commandment is given, and let's refresh ourselves on that. And there's like three things particularly that I want to point out that without doubt, whenever you look at this law, and you say, what is it that God was communicating to people? What was it He was wanting them to learn from this or to obey from this? And I noticed three things particularly that kind of stood out to me. And the first one is that the Sabbath day is holy. It's holy. And you go, well, what is, how's a day holy? What does that mean? Really, it means it's dedicated to God. Now, here's something I want to say. This isn't about just having Sunday morning religion and going, oh, today I'm going to do what God says. Now, Monday I'll do what I want to do. I'll do whatever I want to. Because the point of setting this day, dedicating it to God, is it's an example of how we live our lives. It's just that if you go through life and you don't intentionally do certain things, there's some things that won't happen. I mean, there's some things, like I mentioned last week, that we'll do. We're going to eat, we're going to sleep, we're going to do some of those things. We're going to just naturally do them because our body's almost going to make us do those things. But there's a lot of things in life that our body won't make us do, our mind won't make us do. We have to choose to do those things. It's a discipline. And so whenever we choose to set this day apart to God, to give it to Him, to say, this belongs to God. This day belongs to me. My life belongs to God. Everything about my world, I put God first. It's really about putting God first, put him in his rightful place in our lives, where he's the leader, we're the follower. He's the guide, and we're the tourists, so to speak. He's taken us on this trip called life. So we set apart to God this day. One day in the week, we set it apart to God. The second thing that I noticed in there is to rest from work. Now, some people, look at that and they're going, well, that means that, I can't cook today, so you guys fend for yourselves, I mean, just have to, the Bible said not supposed to work, right? And it even said that, the people that work for you, it talks about servants or that kind of thing. Last night, I got home a little bit before dark, and the weather was cooling down some, so I sat down on the front porch. And I said to anybody who would listen at that point, and I think everybody was out on the porch at that point, I said, if I had a servant right now, I would ask them to go make me a cup of coffee. You guys are laughing. Nobody said anything or did anything. It was very quiet. It's just like I just spoke out into the heavens, And just a little bit, Hunter said, I think you were hinting for Mom to make you a cup of coffee, weren't you? I said, I just was expressing a thought and feeling that I had. I just thought, I'm so comfortable sitting here. It's so nice. The temperature's dropped down that I was thinking, that if I was in a restaurant or in some, I would order a cup of coffee. I would, so still nobody, he mentioned that, and Angie still didn't say a word. She never ever acted like, she didn't even act like she was hearing anything being said. And so in a little while, Hunter said, how do you want your coffee? And I'm like, oh boy, I don't know. I don't know if I want it anyway. If you're thinking about making it here, maybe I will get up and do mine. But he ended up making me a cup of coffee with the Keurig, and even I use only cream, and putting the cream in, and he had it ready for me. And I was like, that was really awesome. That was really sweet of him, and he needs to do something sweet sometimes, That way he can stay there, he gets to stay. But so that was very kind. But in this case, it's saying even if you had people working for you, people that were serving you, then they need to take a rest too. Give them a rest. Give them a day off. Rest from work. And particularly, I don't know if any of you guys ever take a Sunday afternoon nap. Does anybody here brave enough to say, I do sometimes take a Sunday nap? Like, oh yeah, some of you are like, yes! Can't wait. Would you hurry up? I can get to it next, after lunch anyway. So I think that I do believe there's something sacred about it. I don't get them that often, but when I do appreciate them very much so. And if you think about it, if you told somebody, most cases, unless you're in a situation where it fits for it or something, but if you told people, man, I had the best nap Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, this week, they'd be going, you're lazy. That's how we are. Now, if you were from Mexico, they'd be going like, that's smart, you're smart. They believe in siestas, and that's probably a healthy thing. But so most of us would be embarrassed to admit we took a nap during several times during the week. But on Sunday, it seems like that there's no shame, is there, man? You can even brag about it. Man, I slept 3 hours this afternoon, and nobody's going, you're lazy, It's like it's acceptable to take that nap on Sunday afternoon. And so, and that's it should be, because rest is a part of the Sabbath. Setting a day apart for God is certainly saying, hey, this day is dedicated to God, and I'm starting my week off by putting him first, and then I want to live my life with that frame of mind, and then to rest from our work, to take a break from that, and then the day is given to the Lord. And this is kind of like the first thing, setting apart. It's given to the Lord. It's an act of worship. It's an act of worship where we are literally saying, God, this is a day that I dedicate to you, to your purposes. And many of you volunteer here at church, and many of you volunteer on a Sunday morning in various capacities. In fact, there's a whole set of people right now with middle school and middle school and children's ministry and in the nurseries right now are speaking. There's people up here who are working right now while we're speaking. And there's various things that happen, different ones of you that are here serve in some of those capacities, serve in other kinds of capacities in the church. And those are acts of worship. You're saying, I dedicate a part of my week, a part of my life to you, Lord. It's given to you. It's not about me. It's not about what I want. It's about your kingdom and your service. And you say, our whole life should be that. It should be. But I think one of the things that's really awesome about Sabbath is it's a time to reset. It's like we reset ourselves. And I think if we didn't have a Sabbath, we'd have a tendency just to wander away, to wander our own way. I can tell you this, and that is I guess I've into like the 37th year of pastoring at this point, and so I have observed a lot of things over the years, and I have observed people who have become what I would call very careless about these three things: making the Sabbath holy, maybe they were dedicating it to God, taking a rest period, and giving it to the Lord, in some way serving Him, saying, God, this is my life is yours. I'm in your hands. I'm following in your ways. I've seen people become careless with that, and in doing so, often find themselves on that last part, the 3 verses of Psalm 1, headed in the wrong direction and living for the wrong purposes, and really ultimately headed to a place of destruction. And so I believe that this is a very, very critical part of God's economy for us, for the wellness of our soul. Now, I want to, in order to have a broader understanding of this, I want us to go to Matthew 12, and I want to point out a few things here that Jesus did in this interaction with the Pharisees, because I believe this is very misinterpreted oftentimes, and often misunderstood about what he is communicating or what he's not. Let me explain this to you. Moses received these 10 commandments from the Lord. I'm going to tell you what the Pharisees over the years did. They established hundreds and hundreds of rules around these 10 commandments and other commandments of God in order to help people keep those commandments. So in other words, around the Sabbath, they had about 39 basic commandments that were associated with the Sabbath, the commandment of the Sabbath. Then out of that, those were broken down into some. So I don't have a number, but it was a tremendous amount of rules, and they still exist. Actually, many of those rules still exist within what I would call very conservative Jewish practice in Judaism. There are those who endeavor to follow kind of to the T some of those. Now, there are many people, even in the time of Jesus, that didn't try to follow because they couldn't. But the Pharisees were people who literally tried to keep all of those laws. In other words, they had determined, because it said, rest from work. So they had determined, they'd made definition after definition of what work was. What is it that determines that this is work and this isn't. So they had all these rules about that. Then they had made, like, if cooking, say, wasn't, and I'm just using that as an example, not as an exact example, but an example for sake of communication. So if it's cooking, you could do this, but you couldn't do that. Then it was defined that if you cooked this much or this long, then it wasn't working. But if you did this much, an inch longer or an hour longer or 30 minutes longer, then you were sinning. You were violating the commandment. If you walked a certain distance, it was acceptable. But if you walked past that distance, then you were breaking the law. You were breaking the Sabbath. And so, I mean, they just had rule after rule after rule. Now, the Pharisees literally tried to go by all these rules. What happened to them was they took this commandment that God gave, and then they made all these other rules attached to it. And in attaching those rules, they made them just as important as the law of keeping the Sabbath. They made them of equal importance. So if you broke any piece of those laws, then you were breaking the Sabbath. So it was pretty complicated. And honestly, the average Jew did not really abide. They did somewhat, but they didn't go into all the detail. The Pharisees were set apart because they were people who they kept them all. They endeavored as best they could. And part of their goal was to at least give the impression that they kept all of them. That makes me think of modern day politicians. Because if you can just make a good impression, if you convince people you're this or that or whatever, then hey, that's all it takes. So image control. They were very much into image control. Very much into how people saw them, how they thought about them, whatever. And so this is what Jesus walks into whenever he's having this discussion with these Pharisees. He's not just walking into the Sabbath, the commandment of the Sabbath. He's walking into this plethora of other laws that they built around this to define that, over-define it, and to control. And so here's in this passage, here's some of the things that we see him defining for us to help us better understand the Sabbath and what its original intent really was, instead of all these other things. And so if you look at verse 5 in chapter 12, it says this: "Or haven't you read in the law that the priests on Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath, and yet are innocent?" So in other words, obviously on their Sabbath, which for the Jews it was Saturday and still is, but the Sabbath, on that Sabbath, the priests were busy working, serving people, and interacting with, they were breaking the rules of the work thing. They were working. And he's saying they worked, and they weren't going by all the rules on that because they were aiding other people in observing the Sabbath, and they were innocent. They were considered as innocent. And so he's saying this idea that you built all these specific things in place, and you said if you do 1 inch over this or 1 inch, that you guys' rules. He's really cracking at their extra rules. He's not cracking at the rule of the Sabbath. He's not saying the Sabbath doesn't matter. He's not saying it's not important. What he is saying is that they are trying to put things on people that God didn't put on people. And so one of the things that, I grew up in I'd say a fairly strict environment about Sunday. We call Sunday, we observed it as the Sabbath as we do here. And most of the reasons, that were the simple reason that most Christians, not all Christians do. There are churches like the Seventh-day Adventists and others who keep Saturday as the Sabbath. And I'm not really here to, I guess, defend the idea of using Sunday as a Sabbath in that sense, but it's because Jesus rose from the grave on the first day of the week, and this is Sunday, and so most Christian churches see themselves coming together as a way to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, and the Sabbath is about honoring God, setting a day aside in the week to put God first, and letting that project out into the week and guide us through that week. And so that's why we worship on Sunday. I don't really have an issue whether the Sabbath is on what day of the week a Sabbath is. And I don't think the Bible has a big issue with that. But what I do think is important that I think we have a good reason for worshiping on Sunday, and that is to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. But again, many churches today have services at different Saturdays and Sundays, and I think the big thing is that you take a Sabbath for the soul, which we're going to talk about. And so there are those who work on the Sabbath, but even in a strict environment, like there were certain things that that I wasn't allowed to, certain kinds of outdoor activities I wasn't allowed to do growing up, and I'm not deprived or anything like that. I mean, because I got a bigger nap than you did growing up, so on Sunday. But anyway, but there were certain things that we didn't do, we didn't practice, we didn't. We endeavored as much as possible not to buy things on Sunday and that kind of thing, and all in the intent of, in the good intent of honoring God with that, setting the day aside for Him. Some of that was, I think, misguided, a little bit like the Pharisees and legalistic and that kind of thing. But at the same time, it came from the part of saying, let's honor God, let's put him first, let's let him know. But one of the things, even in that strict environment, people who were nurses, people who were doctors, people who had jobs that were caring for people, those are viewed as like, well, I mean, so what if we told everybody in the hospital right now? What if you were in there, with a heart attack or with a situation, and we said, well, we don't want any doctors or nurses to work on Sunday, so then hey, let's hey, hope you make it till Monday. We're not, we don't, that isn't what God, that's Jesus is saying. Look, there are some things that need to be done on the Sabbath. There are some jobs that actually need to happen on Sabbath. Now, obviously, we live in a culture that doesn't do much in the way of honoring the Sabbath and things that don't matter that much. I mean, in most cases, we could get a pair of sneakers some other day of the week, or something else. But we do find ourselves in a situation where we are, I think, probably live in a culture that's pretty careless about what we do or do not do, on the Sabbath. But Jesus was saying there are situations where that's what it is. I think that Chick-fil-A, it gets a lot of good and bad press, and I just found out about Popeye's sandwich. It's better than this morning. It's better than Chick-fil-A's. I haven't. No, I don't. I'm just hearing the buzz stuff going on, And I did notice whenever we went by Popeye's this morning, my kids were saying something about, so maybe they heard it at school. I don't know what they were going like, look at that Popeye's, look at all the people at Popeye's, and all that stuff. So, I'm not recommending you go to Popeye's after church, because I have a feeling you get stuck in a big line, and then you get up there. Someone told me, get up there, and they'll say, we're out of them, And anyway, but Chick-fil-A, have you ever on a Sunday after church gone, well, maybe we'll go to Chick-fil-A. And then someone go, oh, no, they're not open on Sunday. Have you ever said, hey, let's go to Pizza Central for Sunday lunch? No, they're not open on Sunday. That's good, because people need, I'm not saying that it's that someone's going to go to hell if they have a business or they work on Sundays or that kind of thing. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that I would say that there is something about taking a pause, taking a rest, saying, hey, and I heard one of the executives of Chick-fil-A say that one of the reasons, if you've ever noticed, it seems like that their employees almost seem like a little notch above or whatever, a lot of places you go. And they said that they think that is because they give Sundays off, and that they do tend to attract people who are wanting Sundays off and looking for that opportunity to either be in worship or not have to work on a Sunday. And so they do feel like that does help them in the clientele that they employ. So I can't verify that or not, but I can tell you that I've noticed that their protocols tend to be pretty positive, such as this is an advertisement, Chick-fil-A. In fact, go get a Popeye sandwich. No, just they're open on Sunday. Go get. No, I'm not. But I am saying some of the principles that they've implied are, I think, their intent is to honor God with that, and I don't think they've suffered economically for that. I don't think they. In fact, per capita or per store, I think that their profits about the highest of any fast food place out there, even with them not being open on Sunday. So I think that they have seen the reward of honoring the Sabbath. Not that, and I don't say that in a legalistic kind of way, but I just simply say that from a standpoint of going, where can we honor God with this Sabbath, this idea of a Sabbath? So Jesus said, he was saying, look, it doesn't always work out so neatly, Pharisees. Sometimes people do have to work on Sunday, okay? And they're innocent. It's not held against them. So Jesus is clarifying that. He's not saying the Sabbath doesn't matter. He's simply saying this. Let me give you clarification on this. Another thing is that he says in verse 7 is that mercy is more important than sacrifice. Now, there are multiple places in the Bible where this very idea is stated over and over. You see it. I desire obedience more than sacrifice. In this case, it says I desire mercy more than sacrifice. In other words, you're sitting here judging and beating up people because my disciples right now, because they were hungry and they ate some grain from the field, and so that means that they were working and they were breaking one of your extra rules. It didn't state that in the Sabbath rule, but it was, but the way you defined it, they were breaking the rules by the extra things that you put on them. And he's saying, you know, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. You would not, and he's saying if they understood this, they would not have condemned the innocent. So he's saying, these disciples are innocent, but you're accusing them. And what I want you to understand is, you're going through all these things to please God, to honor God. You're keeping all these little tiny rules, all these extra little rules you made to please God. Well, what pleases God is when you demonstrate mercy. Whenever your heart is right with God, when you treat people the way God would treat people, that's whenever you're honoring God. So he's saying, don't use God's rule, his guideline, the Sabbath, as a bat to beat people up with, or and put your measurements on it. And so he's saying mercy comes before sacrifice, and that he's talking about the fine lines of all the things they're doing. They're being judgmental, and he's saying, why don't you show some mercy? That's the heart of God. God's a merciful God. Then verse 8, he says that Sabbath is God's gift to man. Verse 8 says this, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. One of the things another passage of Scripture says, Jesus said this, that the Sabbath was made for man. Man wasn't made for the Sabbath. Sabbath was made for man. So this is a gift from God. God's given us something. He's saying, here's a useful tool for you to use that will serve you well. And so he's given us the Sabbath as a gift. And I think that sometimes we have a tendency to forget that. Have you ever burnt the candle at both ends? Anybody ever done that before? Just for a day or for, okay. Some of you are asleep or lying or something, okay. I don't know why, or lazy. Maybe you're lazy. This is it. We'll say, if you didn't raise your hand, you're late. No, I'm just, but I think everybody's fallen into that trap. I can do it all. Have you ever thought, I can do it all? I can, you know, and you know, there are seasons and times whenever you might have to work 2 jobs. I've even known people sometimes for an occasional time work 3 jobs. But I'm just going to tell you, if you work 2 and 3 jobs for extended periods of time, it's not smart. It is not smart. And so this Sabbath idea is God's idea to help you. It's not, he's not going, well, what's one more way I could restrict Rod? I like restricting people. I like to box them in. I like to make them feel like they're in prison. I'll do that Sabbath thing. Make them miserable for a day out of the week. Can't do anything. Got to go to church, act like you're happy, put on your Sunday go to meet and smile, and go home and take your big nap. You know, and you know, no, he's not. He's saying this is a gift to you. This is a gift I'm giving to you. Take advantage of this gift I've given you, an opportunity to have an absolute, unapologetic, apologized excuse for taking a big old nap, for resting, for being able to tell your spouse, I'd love to go mow the yard, but it is the Sabbath, you know? And I would love to wash the dishes, but you know, I'm not giving anybody a pass on those things. I'm just simply saying, but God is saying, take some time off, for Pete's sake. Do take some time off, refuel, replenish, and it's His gift to us. He's going, you guys have made this into a miserable monster. You've built so many walls and everything around it. You're having measuring tape with you everywhere you go, going, well, I took 2 steps this way and that way, and now I can't go any further. I'm stuck here till Monday, you know, or till Sunday, for in their case, you know. And it's like, you guys have turned this into a disaster. I gave it to you as a gift. Next thing that is mentioned from this passage in verse 10, it said, let me read verse 10 to you. First of all, It says, and a man with a shriveled hand was there, looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus. These Pharisees asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Now here's what they were doing. And I don't even know if they knew this completely, but they were using God's laws to limit God. Here God is with them, in the person of Jesus Christ. And they're going, let's trick him on this one. Let's box him in on this one. Jesus, is it lawful to heal this man's arm on the Sabbath? Oh man, if he says it is, he's breaking law 59 verse 2, but it isn't in the Bible. It's not in God's law book. It's in their law book. It's the oral tradition that they've handed down. And so they're going, if he does, he busts this one right here. He's going to break this one and this one if he says yes. If he says no, then he's not even merciful, just like he said he was merciful. He wants mercy. So they thought they trapped him. Let me just tell you this. Anytime we're tempted to think that we got God over the barrel, think again. We can't. God doesn't allow us to put him in a box. He doesn't allow us to limit him in the sense of what he can or will not do, will or will not do. And so in this situation, these guys thought, we've got him hemmed in now. We've got him where we need him, and he's gonna mess up whichever way he goes. But I want you to look at verses 11, 12. Just listen to them. It says, he said to them, if any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. He didn't, in this case, he didn't even like ask a question. Sometimes he would come back with his questions for people, so then he put it back on them. And this one, he just said right out, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. And then he went ahead and healed the guy right in front of him. Now, I want to tell you, there's something to be said about the spirit of the law. See, the spirit of the law, you say, what was God's intent? Well, his intent was that we have a fresh dedication to him at the start of our week, that we worship him, we honor him. By the way, didn't we have a wonderful time of worship this morning in our music? I thought so. I was having a good time. I hope you were. It seemed like some other people around me were having a good time. We were having a little Jesus party here this morning, I think. That was good. That was good. And I'm going to tell you, if you've been let out of that grave, we were singing about, you remember, you feel that, you understand that. And so good reminder for us. That's what we come to church for, to be reminded, to be inspired, to worship the living God, the God who is alive, who burst out of the grave. And as Tyler was saying in his comments here, we're all going to die. But guess what? The grave is not the end. We're coming out of that grave. We're going to be resurrected with a glorified body. And so the spirit of the law is not out to give us a bad day or to give us a hard time. It's to give us life, to show us what we need to do in order to experience the best life. And so Jesus says, hey, if you had another passage says if you had an ox, and so oftentimes you hear people say ox instead of sheep. So, someone will say, well, why did you do that on Sunday? Couldn't that have way to money? Well, the ox was in the ditch. Now, I have a feeling we've called an awful lot of things oxes that weren't really oxes. Would you say that's the case? Like, well, I just wanted to do this anyway, it's Sunday or whatever. So, like I wanted to sleep in on Sunday because I was really tired from staying up and playing video games till 3 o'clock in the morning. So I just decided to sleep in on Sunday morning. The ox was in the ditch. There wasn't an ox in the ditch. Anyway, so I'm just, we don't call things oxes that are not oxes. If you just, but the ox can be in the ditch. Things can happen that you're just going like, you know what? This isn't something I would normally do on Sunday, but I'm doing it today because the ox is in the ditch, And so, what Jesus is saying is, you guys have made a clown out of God. You've made him something he's not understand God's in the business of doing good. God's in the business of helping people. And so if this man's arm shriveled up on Sunday and I'm standing here and I have the power to heal him, it would be terrible for me not to reach out and heal this man. Doing good is good. So whenever, whenever we get hemmed in by all these rules and these extra things and try to make God something he's not and his rules something he's not, all it does is create pain and problems for people and leaves people in a miserable place. Jesus comes to set us free from the bondage of religion. Not only the bondage of sin, but also the bondage of religion. He didn't come to give us a bunch of religious rules. What he did is say, listen, the things that I've laid out for you, the guidelines that I've given you, the commandments that I've given you are not grievous. They are good, and they are for your good. The Sabbath is good for your soul. I want us to go to the very last verse that I mentioned in closing. Psalm 23. And that psalm, of course, is an awesome psalm. And but verse 3 says, he refreshes my soul. I like how another translation says it, he restores my soul. Have you noticed something about your vehicle? That some reason, one of those gauges on your dashboard, it seems to just make its way over to E. I don't know about yours, but it seems like mine makes it that way too fast all the time. Always making it over to E. And there have been times, more in my past than my present, thank God, where I've pushed my luck with that E. And I've taken walks and things that I really didn't plan to do and all that stuff because I pushed my luck with it. So don't push your luck with the E. Obey the E. And saying, feed me. I need filled up. And so you pull in and you fill that thing up. And for whatever reason, it just seems to run as happy as can be for, the next few hundred miles. But at that point, it's going, fill me up. Do you know that your soul has a tank and it leaks? It leaks grace. It leaks love. It leaks joy. It leaks hope. It leaks all kinds of things. And you know what you have to do? You have to refill. You have to get filled back up. That's what the Sabbath is for you to fill up. Sunday morning is a part of that. It's a piece of that. It's not all of it. Getting a good nap, I think, is probably a piece of that. And many times, if you've worked hard all week, don't apologize. Just tell your family you're checking out for a while. Hey, I got that. I'm honoring the Lord. It's just a Sabbath. I'm going and taking a sacred nap. Go ahead. It is a day of rest. But I think we live in a culture that says it's a day for me to catch up on everything I'm behind on. And you know what I think will happen if you spend every Sabbath catching up on everything you're behind on? You'll probably get further behind and further behind. There's something about resting, and it doesn't have to be sleep. Some people don't need a nap and they don't want a nap. I know. I'm got my brother Rick that has his heart problem and everything. I mean, he's run his life on such little sleep and still seems to run on less than the average person, even with this bad heart. And it's like it seems like his engine's just always going. It's something other than his heart, because his heart's bad. So I don't know what it is that keeps him going, but he just has this motor in him, and it's like always pressing on to something else, and it has that energy. Some people don't need naps, but you have to refuel. You have to fill up somehow. And this morning, I want to say a prayer with you. Tyler's voice is kind of given out on him this morning, so we're not going to come back up and do a song. And so I'm gonna close this out with prayer, and I'm gonna ask you if there's something in your life, some area that you need God to fill you back up. Maybe you feel like your soul is very low on love. Maybe you just feel like, I feel like I've given, and, I don't even like people right now. Maybe you've lost some hope somewhere along the way. Maybe something you feel kind of hopeless about. Maybe just an area of life. I want to tell you, God wants to refuel you today with some hope. Maybe it's in the area of joy. Maybe you just been going so hard you've kind of lost your joy. The skip's not in your step. You just feel kind of miserable. I don't know I can't mention everything that you might need, but what I would say is, let God's Spirit fill your soul. And make a determination that on the Lord's Day, what we call the Lord's Day, Sunday, every week, you're going to look at your life and you're going to say, where do I need to refuel in? Where does my soul need extra help? And ask God and do on your own what you need to do to refuel that.